All right, we're down to the shorter strokes here. I'm gonna want to go ahead and talk about romance a little bit because we said we were going to earlier. I think that's the next thing coming up. Just a quick background about romance. Now romance is really not a biblical topic, right? I mean, the Bible, you just get married and that's it. Is that right? Is there any reference to romance in the Bible?
Yes, Song of Solomon.
He says Song of Solomon is about that. I think through the ages there have been Bible scholars that it bothered them so much that they said, no, that's just an allegory. It has to be just you know what I mean? But yes, we'll talk about Song of Solomon. I'm not sure we have a bunch of time, but I do want to just look at the scene after the wedding scene and look at that. So here's what some things, I don't know what to make of all of this. At one point I said, I'm going to figure out what the Bible says about romance and how it relates to marriage. And I'm going to go through and figure out in the Bible, what does it say? And here's some things. Sometimes romance was created in arranged marriages, even when the people were strangers. And I'm quoting the Isaac and Rebecca story. Remember that story? Now the poor guy just lost his mother, so maybe he was just, it was an opportune time for this beautiful girl to show up on a camel, but still, okay, that's one. Sometimes the romance beforehand led to the arranging of marriages, right? Remember Samson? Don't know if I would call that full-fledged romance, but let's just say it was some kind of desire, and he says, I want this woman to marry, right? Sometimes, though there was romance at the beginning, I guess Michal, if that's the way you say her name. Remember Michal? She loved David at first anyway, until he kind of embarrassed her or something. I don't know what the deal about dancing in front of the ark, but in the early days, I mean, what young girl probably didn't love David, right? Who had slain his 10,000s. He was a rock star, right? And who would not love him? So she did, and she saved him. Remember that? She hid or put a mannequin or something in the bed, and so. Yeah, she loved him. Did that guarantee the success of their relationship? Of course, her being given away for a while didn't probably help, but anyway. Sometimes romance existed in polygamous marriages. And guess what? Big surprise, it created problems. I don't know what else to say about that. Sometimes it existed outside relationships and marriage. That never happens, right? And it led to immorality. So I don't know what to make of that. I guess what I make of it is that I'm not sure that romance and marriage are quite as coupled as we think they are. Okay, so let's think about that just a little bit. And I can express it in a couple of different ways. Just because you're romantically attracted to someone probably doesn't mean you should marry them. That's one thing, right? And just because you're not romantically connected with someone doesn't mean you should divorce them. But I don't know what more we can conclude from that unless we look a little bit deeper at the phenomena itself. Okay, there is some teaching about romantic love, and I would just summarize some lessons from the Song of Solomon. By the way, we'll get to Proverbs in just a minute when we dealing with children, but I just want to talk about Proverbs and Song of Solomon in the collection of wisdom literature, as we call it. Ecclesiastes and Job, you might put in that category. To whom was the Proverbs written? And it starts out by kind of saying who's supposed to learn from it. Gain wisdom. Who's it? So what does it say? Yeah, it's kind of the simple, but it's kind of my son. That phrase, written to my son. The implication is that a Proverbs probably maybe is a father's wisdom being passed down to a son. We'll talk about that more in just a minute. And of course, we all know, except the last chapter of Proverbs, which is chapter 31, which was clearly written for women, right? And the way I know that is because that's what all the women's classes study. Right? Isn't that right? What's Proverbs 31 about? The worthy woman. And the reason I know it says the worthy woman, who can be? Is that what it says? Who can find? As if it might have been written for a man who would be thinking about whom he might want to choose as a mate. However, on the other hand, if I open the book of Song of Solomon and look through it, I don't know how many of you have studied it before, but whose point of view is the Song of Solomon mostly written from? And by that, I mean both characters speak, but there's one of the two characters. I'm taking the two-character view, by the way, and I don't want to get into all the reasons, but two-character view. Whose thoughts are we listening to mostly throughout the book?
The young woman.
Yeah, it's the woman's thoughts and her anxieties and her bad dreams, right? And it's interesting in the wedding scene, and I'm thinking about movies like The Sound of Music, that's how old I am. But when you know that in that you cut to the scene and they're getting married, and da 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 da, and where's the camera pan? Right then. Who's it panned to? Who's it on? It's on the bride. There she is. She's coming in, white dress, everything. In this book, the wedding scene, who's the camera on? Who is it? It's Solomon coming up and his military men and all that. It's almost as if view of the woman watching this groom coming to be with her. But I think zooming out on the book, there are some lessons to learn. Romantic love exists for marriage, not the other way around. That's just another way of drawing that pyramid the way we drew it before. That's what I'm saying. And we'll talk about that. It contributes to the primary function of marriage, which is companionship. It can and should be developed between married couples, but marriage neither validated or invalidated by the presence or absence of romance. I'm not sure I find that in the Song of Solomon, but I still think that's the case. Here's an interesting thought. I think I have to credit C.S. Lewis for this. Romantic love seeks to possess the individual and be possessed by that individual. In fact, you'll find this repeated phrase. In fact, it has it evolves. It's 3 times. My beloved is mine and I am his. That's the first time. And who comes first is I own this guy. I own him. The next time you find it, he says, I am my beloved's and he is mine. That's an interesting reversal. Turns that around. I belong to him. And the last time it says, I am my beloved's. That's it. So you see this kind of growing ownership of 2 individuals. Now this is what C.S. Lewis says. You hear the guys and they're drinking and they're saying, let's go get some women. And what his point is, the last thing they actually want is a woman. They want sex, but they don't want a woman, right? The last thing they want is a commitment, some responsibility, some accountability, right? They want the experience. They're not looking to own and possess and be possessed by the individual. This is a soulmate relationship as it's described here. And while there is discussion of physical pleasures, it should grow to be less self-centered until it finally becomes ownership by another. And that repeated phrase, I think, throughout the book kind of illustrates that. I would also add that sexual attraction in some ways is the same as any other physical appetite. God gave it to us. It can be fulfilled without guilt or shame. It appears and disappears, unfortunately, at opportune and inopportune times, but it has to be controlled nonetheless, right? Like other desires, it can be ruled and it can be overruled by moral and intellectual aspects of man. I'm going to say more about that in the marriage relationship. And here's kind of a key thing. Romance can be improved and enhanced by effort in compliance with God's words. I wish we could spend more time looking at that, but in the process, I think it's the second bad dream she has. The chorus, which I picture as some of the girls come in and they're in this play, they're telling her things, and they just start asking her questions. Who are you? How did you get to be where you are? And she starts remembering all the great things in there. So it's almost by intellectual effort and memory, she is able to rethink, oh, that's right. This man does mean a lot to me. And he has changed my life. And I do miss him a lot, despite the fact he's being a jerk right now. But, you know, they bring her back to that by looking at the past, by intellectual effort. It's not a God, it doesn't overrule God's laws. So let's look at Song of Solomon. If you can find it in your Bible, I think it would be right after Ecclesiastes. If you have a Bible that's marked up, you know, I bet your Song of Solomon is not marked up very much. I might be wrong about that. So the story is, I think, centers around, I think it does anyway, this marriage event. Now, I got to have my glasses. Which you can kind of see it, once again I said the camera pans and it's pointed to the groom at the end of chapter 3, I think it is. And the assumption is that there is a consummation of the marriage in chapter 4, all right? And that comes from chapter 4:12. He says she's a garden enclosed, and then in verse 16 she invites him to come and blow upon my garden, and in chapter 5 he speaks and says, I have come to my garden, my sister. So there's a sense of consummation there. But the wedding scene might start in chapter 3, verse 6. coming up out of the wilderness, pillars of smoke, perfumed incense. Behold, it's Solomon's couch with 60 valiant men around it. With the valiant of Israel, they hold swords, they're expert in war, and so on. So you see this is like the equivalent of the bride coming down the aisle perhaps, but it's Solomon instead. Now, he begins to speak in chapter 4, verse 1, and I would just presume that this might be the wedding night. That's the way it's often described. And he is trying to tell her that he loves her. And he's trying to comfort her and make her feel safe. So some of the things he says, and I think I've in verse 1 through 7, he says, you're very beautiful, right? And he goes through a list of things. Interesting, in their later lovemaking afterwards, instead of 7 wonderful things, he lists 10 wonderful things. That's a neat thing. She sees more in her, not less, after this is over. This later in the book. But anyway, in chapter 4, verse 8, he says this interesting thing. He says, come with me from Lebanon, my spouse, with me from Lebanon. Look from the top of Amana, from the top of Senir and Hermon, from the lion's den and the mountains of the leopards. Now this is weird language, okay? Well, what's the general sense that he's saying? They're not actually in the mountains. This may surprise you. She is not actually on top of Mount Hermon, and there are no literal lions running around. What is his point with this kind of imagery and poetry? What's he saying to her? I will protect you. Come out of the realm of insecurity and danger, and you will be safe with me. I think that's the point. Very picturesque language, right? So first he praises her beauty. He promises her security. And I would note here, especially for women, this is a footnote here, that both of these two things illustrate that there's a holistic relationship that forms the envelope for the sexual relationship. We have totally lost that in our culture. I believe we've lost most of the joy of sexual intercourse because of that, to be honest. I don't quite understand, but anyway, I think the security is a good part of that. And the difference between men and women, you've often heard this, that women will give sex to get love. Men will give love to get sex, right? So, there's this sense of, I'm not really wanting to give this to you, but I will in order to get the more valuable thing. And so there's a sense in which the groom says, I promise you safety. I promise you protection and security. And then in 9 and 10, he says, you just do things to me. I'm deeply in love. You've ravished my heart. You've ravished my heart. One look of your eye, one link of your necklace. How fair is your love? How much better than wine is your love, and the scent of your perfumes, and so on. You see, he's saying you have an enormous effect on me. And I don't think it's just a physical thing. He's just saying that's important. And finally, in verse 12, to me the most moving thing, he says about her, you are a garden enclosed, a spring shut up, a fountain sealed. What is the significance of that? Why would you, that doesn't sound very complimentary. What, does she have constipation? What's going on here? In what sense is she enclosed?
His private place just for him. He lost the joy of having something
that's unique and special and protected. And you can tell that. Look down, when you get to the, she's shut up, a fountain sealed up, verse 16, she invites him in. Come to his garden and eat its pleasant fruits. And then chapter 5, verse 1, he does come to his garden. He says that. But if you look over in chapter 8, near the end, she starts to talk about her little sister a little bit. And she says, I have a little sister. By the way, I mean, there's so many points to make. In the latter part of the book, they start thinking about other people and how their relationship can be beneficial. I think they go back and visit the mom's house, but it's hard to tell that for sure. But now she's worried about her relatives and what's going to be done for them. And I hope they'll get the same relationship that we've had.
And she mentions in verse 2, house of my mother.
Right. So is that a visit home? I don't know. But anyway, I guess he has good relationships with his in-laws. I don't know. We have a little sister. She has no breasts. What shall we do for our sister in the day she is spoken for? You know what she's talking about? She's going to get married one day, but not yet. She's too young. You can tell by her body that she's not very old yet. If she's a wall, now here we are being shut up again. See that? We'll build on her, a battlement of silver. She's a door, we'll enclose her with boards of cedar. Okay? Is it possible some girls are walls and some girls are doors, and you might need to protect some by boarding them up, and others you just celebrate their virtue and you know how they've lived and so on. Interesting. She goes on to say this. Look, she says, I am a wall. How does she know that about herself? Well, she knows it about herself. Solomon tells her that too. Her husband does. And my breasts are like towers. And then this, I'm reading new. I like the NIV some ways in this. Became his eyes. Whose eyes? Whose eyes? Her husband's eyes. As one who found peace. There's an interesting play on words there. Do you know what the Hebrew word for peace is? Shalom. And you know the name that actually comes from the word shalom? Solomon, right. She's kind of like, almost like saying, I brought peace. Or maybe I became Mrs. Solomon. I don't know. Could be that. But what she says is there's this great protection. So he praises her purity. Chapter 4, verse 12. Seems to me there's a little bit of I don't want to make it a formula, but guys probably like formulas. Maybe we need step-by-step instructions. I don't know. But this isn't a bad start to kind of help with building romance in a relationship. That's assuming you can build it. And I think we should assume that. Praise her beauty. Right? And you need to say that, jumping down to this third point, you have an effect on me. You're still as precious to me as when we first got married. And I won't betray you, and I trust that you won't betray me, and I will take care of you no matter what. Now, we say all that in the wedding vows, don't we? That part. I wonder if we really mean it. But why do we not? Can we not repeat those things? I think this groom here knows that that's the secret to winning her heart and building that romantic feeling toward him, okay? Remember, I'm not just talking about sexual attraction. I'm talking about, it's not the sensation. Remember that C.S. Lewis reference that I didn't make a footnote for? It's about the person. It's about a oneness that you have with each other. And I think you build that with these things. Praising her beauty, promise her that she has security in this relationship. You're not going to be among the lions. I'm not going to take advantage of you. And you have this effect on me. I have this great affection. And not only that, you are worth a lot. Your great virtues are to be praised. That reminds me, by the way, of what Christ did for the church. Right? When he sanctified and he glorified and all those things that we're told husbands are supposed to do in an analogous way. There's some suggestions, right, for enhancing romantic relationship. All right, I'm feeling a little bit of time pressure here. So romantic love, and this probably does aim a little bit more at the sexual thing. I think Scott may have mentioned, you may have made a reference to one of these or some of this before. This is in chapter 5 of Proverbs. Now we're into the book that's written to the young men, perhaps, right? And one of the dangers that men will have is to make these stupid decisions about sexual sin. And really, I think, chapter 7 is a pretty good that's not the right word, analysis maybe, of all the ways that this harlot is going to attract the young man. I don't think that's what the purpose of this course is, but it's not bad to look through there and look at where she is and how she talks and how she touches him and the way she compliments him and the way she says you'll never get caught and the way she's dressed and all that. Those are all things that we should be able to watch for, but that's not what this course is about. But this is what it says about romantic love in the context of marriage. What does it mean, drink water from your own cistern, running waters from your own well? Do you know what would that, it's clearly poetic language. By the way, I think this is true adult material, because only adults can understand it. Not because it's kind of schoolboy vulgarity. That's what we usually label as adult material. But I think it's something only kind of adults can understand. What does it mean, your own cistern, your own well? We should probably...
Only with your wife.
Yeah, there's this, it's only shared with her. And she's not shared with someone else. Your springs don't overflow, and you're not drinking water from somebody else's streams as well. So there's this uniqueness, this special relationship that's only there. So I think one of the secrets is that it is private. And there's a sense of privacy that goes beyond just not, engaging in it. So I think there's a secrecy that goes with that. You don't need to share what's going on with the buddies, you know, here's what we do, or, you know, I think it's just a private thing, and that's a sense of security that your wife needs to understand. Let your fountain be blessed, plentiful. I had to start with P's on this one for some reason, but, well, satisfy or rejoice. It's pleasurable. And this is where it came up this morning. It's a huge pleasure. Always and ever be captivated. I hope you notice the parallelism in here. I think this might be the NIV. May you ever be captivated by her love. Is that a good thing, that you're captivated by her love? You're captured. And that's parallel to the word in the next line, which is what? A negative thing. Is that a good thing, that you're captivated by an adulteress? That's not a good thing. It's a terrible thing. In fact, I have to say this. Can that latter line be addicting? Where you get into a habit and you cannot get out of it, and you get into the cycle of reward and feedback, and I'm tempted again, and I'm gratified, and that reinforces it, and I get into this loop of a habit. Can that happen with an adulteress or some other immorality? Of course it can. Can you make that happen in your own marriage? If you did, there's the same word used there. If you did, would that be a good thing? Where you kind of like start to feel withdrawal after a while if you don't have that relationship. And I don't necessarily just mean sexual, but I just mean that companionship. Would that be a good thing, to start to feel uncomfortable and feel withdrawal and feel like, you know, do y'all see what I'm getting at? I think that this idea of being pleasurable has this other piece to it. I don't have the time to draw the little habit thing, but you know how habits work. You do something, you maybe have never done it before, and it's pleasurable. And that pleasure goes into your memory, and that memory is associated with that, whatever it is. Let's make it a cigarette. Anybody here ever smoked? No, don't raise your hand, doesn't matter. It's a terrible thing nowadays, but when I was little it wasn't. But, you know, but at some point, after you get over all the coughing and the stomach aches and the headaches and everything else like that, you kind of get used to it. And it's quite pleasurable, and that pleasure is stuck in your head. You know this about other habits, and I won't bring them up. Oh, I know one. No, we're filming. I won't do that. But anyway, you know that when you do something, it's pleasurable, and that's in your memory, and it brings you back to that. So the next time you're tempted again, because that pleasure is stuck as a powerful stimulant in your memory. Y'all know what I'm talking about? And you do it again, and it's stronger, and so that habit cycle gets built. Very hard to break. And so addictions are just like that. That's what happens. Is that your mind, and not only your chemistry too, but your mind is working against you. Because you've got that memory of that pleasure, good or bad, is stuck in there and it's bringing you back. I guess I'm just trying to say, could you develop that kind of habit with your wife? I think this is suggesting that might be a good goal, actually. And so there's that dependence on one another. Now, that doesn't mean it'll always be there. And you don't build your marriage on it. We've already talked about that. And if it goes away, you deal with that. But it's not a good thing. It's just something you have to deal with. It's not a pleasant thing. So I'm kind of back to Scott's question about there's some things that are just plain old pleasurable. I'm trying to say, let's use that. Let's get ourselves addicted to that pleasure as part of the thing that keeps us faithful. And part of the thing that builds the relationship and the security in our relationship. Now, I already showed you that you just can't go and do that without a larger context of security and respect and other things. But keep that in place, and then let's make this as addictive as we can. What does 1 Corinthians 7 say is one of the purposes for marriage, after all? Because of fornications, right? Let each man have his own wife. And he even goes on to say, let's don't defraud one another, to use old-timey language, right? Because we're not our own. Okay, that's. I'm trying to put. Thank you. I'm trying to put romance into context here, and of course, permanent, ever captivated. That's the idea. All right, this was the assessment I hope you were trying to do, and I've kind of grouped it in. Oh wait, no, I just want to finish. I want to finish that point a little bit. One more thing. So here's what I'm trying to summarize a little bit, and that is there a place for I'll speak a little roughly here. Raw sexual desire in marriage. Is there a place for that? Is it at the top of our pyramid or the bottom of our pyramid? Do we build anything on that, or is it built on everything else? You see what I'm trying to say? And I think that's there as one. Maybe sometimes it's not even there. It may not even be part of it. And I'll just tell you, you might have a wife that has health problems or whatever, but still, it's there. And out of that is the romance, that is the protection and the stability for that. And in that is the commitment to marriage and the common goals that you have. And these are the stable things, not these. And it's built this way, not the other way. Having said that, can I control those emotions that are up there? By the way, they are volatile, right? Sometimes I just have a headache. I really have a headache, right? Or I ate something that I shouldn't have eaten. And I'm just not in the mood, or whatever your thinking is on that. It's just not going to be there. That doesn't matter. Those are the less stable blocks, right? I can handle that. The stable ones remain, that are built on love and sacrificial, of this picture that we had of Christ. That's what that is. And then, but boy, if I can make that more pleasurable, it's helping. It's a how, though, it's not a why. That's my point. Okay. I ask you to fill this out. I really think that building our character, especially as we move into being head of a wife and head of a family, has to be built on our own spirituality. I hope you read all these and looked through these. Did you have a chance to do this? Did you come back and do this? Okay. I'm not going to take the time necessarily to do it, but there are 3 of these. Here they are. One is, actually I am going to go through this. I think there's just so much practical stuff here. And you maybe should just put an X by the ones that are a problem for you instead of checking. I'm sure all of these are good checks for you guys. But I think that if you don't do something differently as a result of having been here in your life, maybe we've wasted our time. You might want to pick one of these to try to improve, or 2 or 3. Let's talk about some of these. Look, spirituality. This is, you love the Lord your God with all your heart. It's the basis of everything else, of the sacrificial, that's the second one, and the skills and strength. Do you believe that God exists? Jesus is His Son. Do you believe the Bible's inspired? I pray often on my own. I study the Bible on my own. You see, there's a core values. They don't have to do with anybody else, but they indicate what's at the heart of your character. I initiate family studies and devotions. I give sacrificially, my own personal sacrifice, including secret gifts. I'm an example of honesty in business and personal transactions. My personal habits are pure and they're improving. I'm patient and calm even when things go wrong or others are angry. I resist jealousy, covetousness, materialism, greed, pride, and desire for revenge. I'm an example of thinking and speaking the best of others and not judging motives prematurely. Did any of these hurt you, your conscience, when you read them? If they are, put a little X by them and work. I'm an example of personal discipline in all aspects of life. Physical fitness, mental alertness, use of time, use of money, all of those things. And I have no offensive or detrimental habits. Okay, looking outward then. The first thing I think about in my decisions are what's best for my family. That's assuming you're in a headship position. I'm known for gentleness and care for all others around me. I'm going to use my laser pointer. I take time off or use days off for seeing to my wife and children's needs. I'm careful not to create a burden on my wife because of, are you ready? I can't be reached. I'm unavailable. I have an unpredictable schedule. I'm personally sloppy or some other self-centered activity. I mean, sometimes we have this feeling that, it's just the way I am. I don't know what it is. My socks always fall in the middle of the living room. And I can't explain it, but I can't change it either. It's just there. It happens. And there may be inconveniences. And the same thing, you should never be out of reach, right? There should be 4 or 5 numbers your wife can continue to call where somebody can come and find you. And I do not claim to have followed that. Okay? I'm just saying I feel terrible that I didn't. That there were times when it was important for her to call me and I was not to be found. Because I was careless about I frequently and voluntarily help with the cooking, washing, cleaning, and managing kids. I offer to relieve my wife. I don't know why we're reluctant to do that. I mean, I don't know. We got this idea of what woman's work is. Maybe that's part of managing the house, but I don't know. But you should practice that. You might need to use it one day. I offer to relieve my wife of duties. I'm sensitive to her overload. I'm known for volunteering at church, especially to help the, guess what, the weak and needy. My personal hobbies and outings with the guys are subject to cancellation based on the desires and needs of my wife, and I'm not ashamed of that. Right? You ever been with the guys and the wife calls to ask for one of the guys and everybody lets him have it, right? Because his wife's checking on him and he's embarrassed to death. Okay? I'm never angry when my proposals are not approved or they're not followed. I never hold a grudge when others' mistakes keep me from getting my way. I give up job opportunities and job income for family time and service to others. I ask about my wife and children's needs and problems with calls and conversations. I'm known for my care and for my needy relatives. I'll just say back on that one, just an interesting personal story. My dad was very proud of this fact. Wherever he went, and he traveled a lot, around the world, different places, he always called home every night. It was kind of interesting. And of course, he made that a habit, made that a kind of a trademark in a way. And that was a challenge in the days when there weren't cell phones and there weren't, you had to remember a credit card number and another number or else call, collect, and all that. Of course, he worked for the phone company, so part of it was the pride that the phones would work from anywhere in the world. But there's some countries in Europe you had to find a post office, and they'd let you in and you can make a call. That's the only way you could get a call placed, but he did that. So I'm known for my care and for my needy relatives. Y'all got any of those that you have to take care of? My wife's car, clothes, housework tools are safer and better than mine. And I don't mean than your housework tools, I mean your other tools, right? How's that going? I'm visible at school and serving. I've provided adequate life and health insurance at the sacrifice of my income. I plan our vacations and outings for the maximum benefit of my wife and children. I hope you see a little bit of the pyramid in this, right? And that is, it's not just about the pleasure. Everything we do has some aspect of helping others, serving others. I'm on very good terms with all who know me. I'm satisfied when others get the credit for success, even if I have been involved. And finally, skills and strength. And this is the area where maybe you got all these virtues knocked out, right? But here are some things that you will probably have to learn to do if you're younger or get better at over time. I'm going to stand back here. How's your Bible knowledge? Do you have good Bible study tools? I think that's maybe an indicator. I know a lot of stuff's online, but it doesn't hurt to have some good books that you can just lay out on the table. How's your library, by the way? You have several versions of the Bible. Are they marked up? They got good wide margins, evidence of study. That's a pretty good symptom of that. And here's a test. My family often asks me, where is that verse? Or what does the Bible say about this or that? And I'm able to answer. I know some families where the wife can answer those questions very well, but maybe the husband can't. That'd be a test. I often initiate spontaneous Bible discussions, right? Skipping on down. My physical condition is robust enough that I can easily accomplish required activities with energy and strength to spare to care for others. That's in the pyramid. I think physical fitness, if you can do it, if you have an illness, you just deal with that. But those are things within our control. And they probably reflect a sense of discipline. I'm competent to fix cars and home appliances. I earn adequate income to support my family because that's the purpose of it. I understand finances, budgeting, insurance, taxes, investing to whatever levels needed. Here's one. I manage our expenses to be well within our income, including our liberal contributions, short-term emergency fund, and so on. I am the one who resolves the conflicts between my wife and myself, and even between members of our extended family. Y'all don't have any conflicts in your extended family, I wouldn't guess, right? Nobody would have that. Are you known as a peacemaker? Blessed are the peacemakers. And one who actually does that. And by the way, a lot of skill required in that, I would think, and if you're good at it. I've studied my wife's strengths, and I understand her fears and hopes. I find ways to help her excel in areas of service where she's suited. And I know each of my children, their strengths, their weaknesses, their uniquenesses, and I know how to teach, advise, protect, comfort, encourage, and warn them, and so on. So you assess those, and you might feel like some of those are a little difficult. All right, roles of a father. Let's see, how can I budget this? We have till 5, right? All right. We're going to try to go get this done by maybe 25 till. I think that would be. The next section is not very, very long, and we'll have some time. Got to reset a little bit. I think there's one fundamental thing about rearing children that makes Christians different from everybody else that approaches that issue. And it's not so much the techniques at all, but it's one fundamental underlying assumption. And we've already talked about it. We started the whole course with this idea. And that is, we are at war. I don't think that's the worldview of things. Look at some of these passages. All who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution. That's outside. Beloved, I beg you, as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul. That's inside. Having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, so when they speak against you, that's outside. As evildoers, they may by your good works which they observe